able to use. The minister passed a law that clearly states passengers must be compensated in cash. So while supporting airlines, will he also support everyday Canadians?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the honourable member for the question. We've heard from all of our constituents across the country the concerns that our constituents face, and no Canadian should have to choose between paying for rent and having income insecurity as a result of unable to receive refunds. The Minister's office continues to work with airlines across the country to ensure a solution. We will continue to work with them and hope to have more information in the coming weeks and months. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable member for Fleetwood, Port Kells.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question's for the Honourable Minister of Fisheries, Oceans and the Canadian Coast Guard. Can the Minister update the House and fisheries stakeholders in British Columbia on the Minister's response to recommendations 18, 19 and 20 in the Commission of Inquiry into the decline of sockeye salmon in the Fraser River, the Cohen Commission, which called for an evaluation of the risk to wild Fraser River salmon posed by aquaculture operations in the Discovery Islands, and a decision by September 30th, 2020 on whether or not they should continue operations in that area?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries and Oceans.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank my colleague for the question and for his work on the Fisheries Committee, and specifically on his recent work on wild Pacific salmon, a subject that we both share a passion for. I want to be very clear. Our government is committed to transitioning away from open net pen finfish aquaculture in British Columbia in a responsible way. Part of that responsibility is to consult meaningfully with affected First Nations, and that is exactly what we are taking the time to do.
The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, 108 workers in Thetford mines, 130 in Thetford in another area, are deprived of half of their pay since May because they are falling between two different programs, despite repeated requests by my office to the minister's office. Some 5 months later, they're still waiting. I would put a hashtag incompetent. When will the government give them their full salary so they can pay rent and for their food? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Please turn on your microphone. The Honourable Leader of the Government. Mr. Speaker, the government is doing everything it can to help our workers, to help people who have lost their jobs, starting with the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. Now we're moving towards EI so that no one is left behind, and we're there for people in need, and we will continue to do that. The Honourable Member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, we're talking about a transition that they want to make, but they couldn't even make the transition that they should have made 5 months ago. How are these people going to pay for their bills with half their pay? I'm talking about people who are waiting and trusted the government. They continue to wait, and they're only getting half of their pay for 5 months, 5 long months. It took a lot less time for the government to help out its friends at the We Charity. When will these workers get their pay? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Employment.
We recognize the urgency of the situation, and that's why our government has taken action to support workers and their families. In August, we announced the next steps in our government's plan to support Canadians through this pandemic. Our plan includes a seamless transition to EI, coupled with the creation of new benefits to ensure that no Canadian worker is left behind. Last week, we introduced legislation to create these benefits. Our goal during this transition from emergency to recovery is to provide Canadian workers with the certainty and comfort they can count on over the long term. No matter what stage or phase of recovery communities are in, we will leave no worker behind.
The Honourable Member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the government's current plan is not working. With the pandemic, we have to make internet development a real priority. We have to ensure that young people can have access to education. This is important. We're talking about regional vitality. When will the government will sit down with the CRTC and have a real internet deployment plan and put in place and ensure that all the telecommunications company contribute? It's important, Mr. Speaker. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank my colleague for his question, his very important question. I live in a rural area, and I really understand that internet is no longer a luxury, it's an essential. We know in the last 6 months, many people have worked home, they've done their classes from the kitchen table, they visited their doctor's appointments online, and accessed other government services remotely. So it's important more than ever that all Canadians have access to the internet. And as confirmed in the throne speech, we are going to accelerate the connectivity timelines and the wonderful ambition of the Universal Broadband Fund to ensure that all Canadians, no matter where they live, has access to high-speed internet. Thank you, Mr. President.
The honourable member for Tobique-Mactaquac.
Mr. Speaker, with the rise of working from home and schooling from home due to COVID-19 in much of the country, access to strong, reliable internet is more important now than ever. The quality of internet service continues to rise in our urban centres, while places like Borden, Carleton to Fernwood in the heart of Melpeck, Prince Edward Island are left behind. This is just another example of the Liberal government ignoring rural Canadians. When will the Prime Minister listen to the current concerns of rural Canada and ensure that all Canadians have access to quality broadband internet?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Minister of Rural Economic Development.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd like to echo my comments to my colleague across the way. I, too, understand the importance of connectivity and how we need to move forward. I'm delighted that we've connected just over 1 million homes in the last, in spending $1 million. We've connected over 1 million homes in our last program. We're all looking forward to the new Universal Broadband Fund. We're excited with the partnerships that can avail of to connect rural and remote communities, to leverage money, and of course with the announcement the other day with Canadian Infrastructure Bank, that's a $2 billion investment to connect more than...
The Honourable Member for Jonquière. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government House leader seems to have developed a new narrative that we want an election and not to collaborate. I know that the cultural industry has suffered hard during the pandemic, and perhaps I can refer him to a quotation from his colleague, the member for Malpeque, who said that Canadian taxpayers are not a bank machine for Quebec. I can tell you that we're not getting enough money. I have a simple question, and I don't want to hear about an election. I don't want to hear about collaboration. Can the Minister of Heritage commit to ensuring that the Quebec cultural sector has immediate and direct access so that they can pay their rent and fixed costs? The Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, I know the importance of culture, and I was myself privileged enough to be Minister of Canadian Heritage. And yes, we will be there for the cultural sector, Mr. Speaker. But I was asking my Bloc Québécois colleague the question. I have a lot of respect for them. They do good work, but they said they would never vote for the government again after yesterday. So will they vote no will they vote no on this like everything else? The Honourable Member for Manicouagan. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the Bloc Québécois' exclusive loyalty to Quebecers, and we could talk about elections outside the House. Of course, the Bloc Québécois is exclusively loyal to Quebecers, what's good for Quebec. And if it's brought to the House, we'll vote in favor of that. So let's clarify that. To start talking about culture, we have just asked for a clear answer. Our museums, our theaters, our concert halls are in the red zone for the next 28 days. They'll be closed. Owners of these spaces are having difficulty. This means that our artists still cannot make their living. We know that culture is very important to Quebecers. This is part of our identity.
The
Honourable Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, the Bloc Québécois is not Quebecers. We have to understand that Bloc Québécois is just a political party with its strengths and weaknesses. That's it. It doesn't represent all Quebecers, Mr. Speaker. They can't speak on behalf of my colleague from Louis Saint-Laurent or from the other MPs who represent other parts of Quebec. The Bloc Québécois is for the Bloc Québécois, period. What I want to know, Mr. Speaker, is they decided to watch the game from the bench.
Member for Regina Leuven.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Former Liberal Dan Matteague recently released a study that revealed the Liberals' new fuel standard, dubbed Carbon Tax 2.0, will increase home heating costs by 60%, drive up the price of fuel by another 13 cents, will cost 30,000 jobs, and will remove $22 billion from our economy. To the Minister of Economic Development, why does your government continue to wage war on hard-working men and women in our energy sector, manufacturing sector, and agriculture sectors across our country?
Secretary.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government has put in place an ambitious climate plan that is doing more to cut pollution than any other plan in Canada's history. Mr. Speaker, we're also putting more money in Canadians' pockets. The Clean Fuel Standard represents a massive opportunity to create jobs, attract investment, drive innovation, and ensure Canada is producing the things the world wants well into the future. Canadians expect climate action now, Mr. Speaker, and that is what we will deliver.
Member for Regina Leuven.
Mr. Speaker, this has nothing to do with climate action, and I've figured out what their actual priorities is. Today, they posted a job for $90,000 for a storyteller and team lead in the PMO. In the middle of the pandemic, is that your priority? You want a storyteller to tell the stories of this Prime Minister? It's shameful. When thousands of people in Saskatchewan are looking for jobs for months and people are paying their mortgages with their line of credit, your priority is a storyteller for your unserious, unethical Prime Minister. You should be ashamed of yourselves and get a real plan for jobs in our country.
I just remind the honourable member to direct his questions to the chair. The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Mr. Speaker, all we hear from the Conservatives is what they are against. They are against putting a price on pollution. They're against having cleaner fuels. They're against having a real climate plan. Mr. Speaker, we know we have to take climate action now. Canadians know this. The world knows this. It seems the only people that don't are the Conservatives.
The honourable member for New Brunswick Southwest.
Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, the Natural Resources Minister told CBC News there's no path to net zero carbon dioxide emissions without nuclear power. The minister gave every impression the Liberals' throne speech would commit added research and development to small modular reactor technology. This is also a priority for New Brunswick government. Yet the throne speech was totally silent on SMRs. Does the government consider SMRs to be part of the country's clean and affordable energy solution, or is this minister just out of the loop on national energy decisions?
The honourable parliamentary secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to answer the question. Certainly, small modular reactors have a wide range of potential applications, are emissions-free, and could be an option for communities that choose to use them. In 2018, a steering committee, including provinces, territories, and power utilities, submitted the SMR roadmap. To date, we have seen a clear interest and initial action taken to advance this technology in a safe and responsible way. The safety of Canadians and protection of our environment remain top priorities for both our government and industry's regulator, the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission. We have more to say about this, and we are very excited about the possibilities that the SMR sector is presenting to Canadians. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The Honourable Member for Glengarry, Prescott Russell. Mr. Speaker, the COVID-19 pandemic has upset many aspects of our lives. Our government has been there to ensure that no one faces the pandemic alone. Our government has provided significant benefits such as the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, the Canadian Student Emergency Benefit, all this at a time when the public service had to make a considerable effort to work remotely. Can the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Digital Government tell us what the government and how the public service have adapted to provide these important services to Canadians? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank the member for Glengarry, Prescott Russell, for his hard work and for that great question. more than ever before we've seen the important role of the digital government during a crisis. Our government has increased capacity of IT system to meet quickly growing demand for digital public service and telework through tools such as the COVID-19 benefit search and the COVID alert. Development that normally would take months and years took just a few weeks. Our public servants are amazing. We have shown that we have provided good quality digital services that are faster and more reliable that will improve the lives of Canadians.
Kelowna Lake Country.
Mr. Speaker, it's been another summer where my constituents have not been able to utilize the Okanagan Rail Trail to its full capacity. A section of the trail is closed due to the factor that the federal government has delays in administering an addition to reserve, and people dangerously have to divert onto a highway. This decommissioned CN Rail project is a model of cooperation between our local municipal governments and thousands of donors and volunteers. I wrote the Indigenous Services Minister months ago with no response, and my constituents are getting frustrated. When will the minister resolve this land transfer?
The Honourable the Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to sit down with the member and brief her further at another occasion for sure, Mr. Mayor. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Battle River Crowfoot.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Businesses across Canada are struggling in their recovery. I hear from many about CEBA, their frustration with applications, delays on changes that were promised long ago, long wait times, and even that MPs are being barred by officials to even ask for help, especially when Liberals only seem to respond to our questions with condescension. That is not enough. To the Minister, when can we expect the small business lifeline to be fixed?
The Honourable Minister of Finance.
Thank you for the question. And Mr. Speaker, I would never be condescending to any member in this House, particularly to members talking about our small businesses. I absolutely agree with the member opposite that now, at the time of the coronavirus crisis, they need our support. We committed in the throne speech to enhancing CEBA, and we are very hard at work on that. We'll have more to say very soon. We also committed to further support on fixed costs and to targeted support for businesses facing new lockdown measures. All of that will happen. And thank you for the question.
Honourable Member for Markham Unionville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The York Regional Police have reported busting a multi-million-dollar illegal casino ran by organized crime in Markham. These types of operations fund the drug trade, human trafficking, and the dirty money they make is protected with their brutal violence. Liberal policies are soft on crime and hard on communities. These policies are failing the GTA. That is why organized crime is thriving. Mr. Speaker, why won't the Liberals take organized crime seriously?
The Honourable Parliament Secretary.
Well, Mr. Speaker, if I may, first of all, let me be very clear that we take the threat of organized crime, transnational organized crime, money laundering, and the activities that the member described very, very seriously. I'm a little bit perplexed by the member's assertion now, because when he and the Conservatives were in Parliament, they cut the resources to the RCMP. They closed all the integrated proceeds of crime units, and police services, excellent police services like the York Regional Police Service, have always relied on a well-funded support from the RCMP. That's why we've been working so hard to restore the capacity of the RCMP to participate fulsomely and to lead Canada in the fight against organized crime. Mr. Speaker, we will always stand resolutely to ensure that our officials have the resources they.
The Honourable Member for Cumberland Colchester.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question is for the Parliamentary Secretary of the Minister of Fisheries. I sit in the unceded traditional territory of the Mi'kmaq in Nova Scotia, and each year on October 1st, we celebrate Treaty Day to honor the peace and friendship treaties between Nova Scotia's original Mi'kmaq First Nations and European settlers. My constituents in Millbrook First Nation, as well as the Mi'kmaq across the province, would appreciate an update on the current nation-to-nation discussions underway between our government and the Assembly of Mi'kmaq Chiefs. based on their treaty rights to fish for a moderate livelihood, which was upheld in a ruling on the Marshall decision.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Fisheries.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for the question and for the excellent work she does in this place on behalf of her constituents. Yesterday was indeed Treaty Day, and it reminds us of the important work that still needs to be done in honouring the peace and friendship treaties signed so many years ago. Under the Marshall Decision, First Nations have a constitutionally protected right to fish in pursuit of a moderate livelihood, and implementing this decision is critical to the work of reconciliation and is a priority for our government. The minister continues to have conversations with First Nations leadership and will continue to work collaboratively to fully implement their treaty rights.
Honourable Member for Churchill, Kiwatanak-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, today we are reminded that COVID-19 can hit anyone, anywhere, even the President of the U.S. We also know that First Nations are disproportionately impacted. One of the biggest challenges for First Nations is how do you self-isolate when your house is overcrowded during a housing crisis? Every day, Indigenous people are forced to leave their community for essential services. For communities now in lockdown, like York Factory, people are stranded. What actions is this government taking to ensure that people can safely remain outside their community for their health and that of their First Nation?
The Honourable Minister of Indigenous Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for this important question. I would like to update her on the recent cluster of cases in York Factory. A rapid response team has arrived in the community a few days ago, and they are ensuring that the community members that are affected are isolating, and we're tracking and testing cases. We are cautiously optimistic about the outcome and the safety of that community at this time. Obviously, we know that Indigenous communities face these barriers and continue to face these barriers as a second wave hit, and we will move aggressively to deploy surge capacity and ensure isolation, whether it's inside or outside the community, to avoid that important vector of transmission that can be caused with inter-community travel. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise in this place to raise an issue that I think has not been raised here before, and that is that imminently the United States military plans to start bombing within the territory of our southern resident killer whales. It's called, very benignly, the U.S. Navy Northwest Training and Testing Activities, but it will include use of torpedoes, bombs up to 1,000 pounds, explosives, testing underwater drones in our shared waters. This government has said nothing. The state of Washington has protested. When will this government deliver a clear message to the U.S. Navy? Do not do this in our waters. Do not wipe out our southern resident killer whales.
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, our government is committed to the protection of the marine environment and have made significant investments over the years to protect southern resident killer whales. Canada's Navy has always been a strong steward of the environment, has taken action to cease training operations in the area until we can assess the situation. They have also had procedures to limit impact on training on wildlife. We will continue to work with the Department of Defense and our counterparts in the United States on this important issue.
Ça va conclure les questions orales pour aujourd'hui.
That concludes our oral questions for today.
Oh, I see the Honourable Member for Regina Leuven, perhaps on a point of order. The Honourable Member.
Yes. Point of order. I'm sure if you seek it, you'll reach unanimous consent. I'd like to table this document titled Story and Team Lead, reference number PC020OJ0215150000073, because I believe that it's proof that the government does have a serious jobs plan, and I'm sure they want this on the record of how serious they are about employees Canadian
I think what we heard there was a unanimous consent request for tabling a document. This being a hybrid sitting of the House, for the sake of clarity, we've gone through this before. I'll ask only those opposed to the request to express their disagreement. Accordingly, all those opposed to granting unanimous consent to table this document will please say so now. So there is no consent. Tabling of documents. Dépôt de documents.
Tabling of documents.
Introduction of government bills. Dépôt de projet de loi émanant du gouvernement.
Introduction of government bills.
Déclaration de ministre.
Statements by ministers.
Rapport de délégation
Presenting reports from interparliamentary delegations.
Presenting reports from committees. Présentation du rapport du comité. Introduction of private members' bills. First reading of Senate public bills. Motions. Motion. Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The Honourable Member for Scarborough Rouge Park.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to present a petition signed by 409 Canadians, and this is in support of the 5 men who walked from Toronto and the 3 that walked from Montreal to bring to light issues of the families of the disappeared. As you know, there's over 60 to 100,000 Tamils who disappeared during the last phase of the war in Sri Lanka, and this is to bring attention to their plight, and this is asking the Minister of Foreign Affairs for a response. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. The Honourable Member for Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is an honor to present petition E2710. This has been signed by over 1,100 Canadians, and it relates to the ongoing debates around the Israeli plans to annex occupied Palestinian West Bank. The Government of Canada opposes this, of course. It's an illegal act should it happen. The undersigned citizens and residents of Canada call on the government to put some force behind the call that Israel stepped back from this illegal action by banning the importation of settlement products into Canada, incorporate a settlement exclusion clause into the Canada-Israel Free Trade Agreement, differentiate between those products made within legal Israel and those from the occupied territories, and ask the Canadian Revenue Agency to take steps relating to the charitable status of the Jewish National Fund, which is supporting these illegal settlements. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, I know I just rose on the salmon crisis, but I'm tabling a petition again on the opioid crisis, Mr. Speaker. The petitioners are from Port Alberni, Qualicum, and Parksville. They're citing again, Mr. Speaker, that the government, that there's been more lives lost, over 15,000 lives, to a tainted drug supply that could have been preventable, Mr. Speaker. And they're citing that there is more lives lost than COVID-19, than SARS, H1N1, and they're simply asking the government to show that they understand the seriousness of the crisis, Mr. Speaker, by declaring it a public health emergency, which needs to happen, Mr. Speaker, under the Emergencies Act for the government to develop a plan to save lives. They're asking the government to reform current drug policy and to create with urgency and immediacy a system to provide safe, unadulterated access to substances so that people who use substances experimentally, recreationally, or chronically are not at imminent risk of overdose due to a contaminated source. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. The Honourable Member for London North Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's an honour to rise to table petition E2636, a petition signed by nearly 3,000 Canadians from coast to coast to coast. The petition calls for the government to put in place a measure that would see menstrual products, tampons and pads provided for free in all federally regulated workplaces. The petition is one that seeks to revamp an initiative brought forward originally by this government in May of 2019, an initiative that has so far gone forward through a consultation, but has not been introduced in terms of a concrete outcome. I call on the government to take this very seriously. I also commend the individual who introduced the petition, who's a former constituent. Her name is Rachel Edinger. She and other Canadians have called for this for a long time. She's passionate. She's an advocate. She is a champion of women's rights and human rights. The petition is a serious one. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Presenting petitions. Présentation de pétitions. And seeing no hands raised from those who are joining by video conference. Questions on the order paper?
Yeah, the sad news, here it is right here by the Navy commander of the U.S. Navy. Trump and his wife, Melania, have tested positive. So Trump and his wife, Melania, tested positive for COVID-19 by Jeff Mason. U.S. President Donald Trump said on Friday that he and his wife, Melania, tested positive for COVID-19 and were going into quarantine, upending the race for the White House. We will begin our quarantine and recovery process immediately. We will get through this together. The president said that in a late-night tweet just a minute ago. Trump, who's 74, is a high risk for deadly virus, both because of his age and because he is considered overweight. I think this is a little bit hyperbole in this article by Jeff Mason. He has remained in good health during his time in office, but is not known to exercise regularly or follow a healthy diet. Trump also played down the virus in its early stages and repeatedly predicted it would go away. More than 200,000 people have died from COVID-19 in the United States alone, with the elderly and those with pre-existing conditions especially hard hit. The president rarely wears a mask and has ridiculed others. He wears a mask. We have the picture, including Democrats' presidential nominee Joe Biden for doing so regularly. Health professionals say that face coverings are key to preventing the spread of the virus. Biden has criticized Trump sharply for his response to the pandemic, while the president has touted his own management of it. Trump, who has tested regularly for coronavirus, which causes COVID, has held rallies for thousands of people in recent weeks and the Trump run-up and the November 3rd election, Despite warnings from the public health professionals against having events of large crowds, he did it anyway. On Thursday night, the president predicted the end of the pandemic was in sight. Shortly thereafter, news broke that Hope Hicks, a top advisor and trusted aide, had tested positive for the virus. That's how they got it. It wasn't through his course. So Hicks traveled with the president on Air Force One on Tuesday and Wednesday. The development alters the presidential race dramatically. The White House issued a new schedule for Trump's activities on Friday that did not include his planned trip to Florida. Biden is scheduled to campaign in Michigan on Friday. Both states are swinging that could threw the election over. Trump, who has been criticized for questioning the efficacy of wearing a face covering, though he wears it, produced a mask from his pocket in the first presidential debate on Tuesday and said, "I wear masks when needed. When needed, I wear masks." He then ridiculed Biden for wearing them regularly. "I don't wear masks like him. Every time you see him, he's got a mask. He could be speaking 200 feet away, and then he shows up with the biggest mask I've ever seen." Trump has held regular rallies around the country to drum up enthusiasm for his candidacy against the former vice president, who has eschewed campaign events with large numbers of people. Trump has taken pride in his big campaign rallies with crowds of people who do not wear masks or maintain social distance. Yes, they do. You've seen it on our footage. So the futures of the S&P 500 fell 2%. Asian trading after other news extended earlier losses. So the yields have dipped. Trump has been trailing behind Biden and has clearly failed to narrow the gap after the first debate. I suspect markets will lean towards the view that Biden will likely win the election, said Nayo Yoshikana, a senior economist of Sumitomo Mitsubishi Asset Management. Exactly. What I am worried about is that we'll become more aggressive against China after he caught the virus himself, said Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Spent 2 weeks recovering. The Canadian Prime Minister went into quarantine in March after his wife caught it. Brazilian president got it. So this is what it boils down to. President Trump has it. We're all praying for him. The markets, as soon as he was sick, the markets showed sign. That's what'll hum if Biden wins. Leave your comments below. Have a good night.